Let's hope my last comment didn't quite get caught. I'm not really going to murder any. Not one little bit. It wasn't aimed at anyone in particular. Anyway, before I ramble on, hello Sarah Bonner, how exciting.
Hello.
Perfect Twin, tell us a bit about it. I'm really, really
So,
excited to talk about it.
so this is Her Perfect Twin, which is my debut psychological thriller novel. It came out in January in hardback, and then last month, so yeah, about a month ago now, in paperback, which is the new wine cover. So on brand. Do have some wine, although it's the wrong color, but
Yeah,
these
can't have everything.
you can't have everything. So Her Perfect Twin tells the story of Megan, who discovers that her identical twin sister Leah and her husband have been having an affair. And she goes to confront her sister, and they have a heated discussion about things, and Megan accidentally kills her. And she does what I think we would all try and do in that type of situation. She basically tries to get away with it, and she comes up with the idea that she could just pretend to be Leah and herself for a period of time, until she can think of maybe a slightly better long-term plan. And it's starting to look like potentially she could get away with it. But it is March of 2020, and the UK goes into lockdown. And so she is locked down at home with her husband, who maybe knows a little bit more than she thought he did about what she's been up to.
That is a very good kind of selling of the book, giving just enough away, but not really even scratching the surface, would people believe from that description. It's one of the most surprising things that I've read in ages. So, but you know this, we talked about this, but there's so many things that you can't say on camera to people who haven't read it yet.
I know, and that's always the difficult bit talking, particularly, I mean, with any thriller. But it's always, yeah, so difficult to kind of talk about it in detail. So I've done a couple of book clubs, which is great, with kind of a small group who have already read it.
Yeah.
And that's always quite fascinating to hear people talking about the spoilers and the ending and things. But obviously, we won't do that
No.
today in case people haven't read it.
Well, Leslie's already saying that she loved it. So
Thank
that's
you.
come up as Facebook user. Leslie, you need to click that button that gives permission so we can see it's you. She won't. She has no intention of doing. Tell us about kind of crafting Megan and Leah, who are the twins in Her Perfect Twin. So Megan is kind of the good girl, as you'd imagine, seeing as Leah's the one who's having an affair with Megan's husband. So that must have been so much fun, writing the two different sides.
It really was. It really was. So the interesting thing with the two twins is Megan. So it started off as a short story, very much focused on Megan and her deciding if she should go on another date with this guy who thought that she was her twin. And as soon as I started writing her, she was really kind of fully formed. So she had this quite specific voice, and I really felt like I knew her right from the off. Um, there are elements of, I suppose, myself in her. I've always been the kind of slightly good girl and do the right thing and all of that. I've never killed my twin. I will be very clear about
Do
that.
you have a twin? Do we have evidence
I
of
don't
this?
have a twin. I
Did
have
you
an older
ever have a
brother, so
twin?
he's safe. Um, but yeah, so she was always quite fully formed, and then the really fun bit I think was Leah, because she's so different,
Mm.
and she is not a very nice person and does take these absolute liberties with her sister. She was really quite fun to craft as that contrast against what Megan was like.
Mm.
So yeah, really enjoyed I suppose playing around with some of those differences. And one of the reasons that I was so drawn to writing about twins is this idea about how much of us is the stuff that we're born with, our genetic makeup, and how much of us is the, I suppose, aggregation of all of our experiences and every person that we've ever met, and all of those things that influence who we eventually become. And that was really, really interesting to explore. Two people on the surface of things should be the same person because they are genetically the same, they grew up in the same household, but they ended up becoming so very, very different. And it was really interesting to explore, I suppose, how those common things that happened in their childhoods would manifest themselves into differences in adulthood.
What a clever way of looking at it. I'd never kind of considered the whole nature versus nurture with twins. I haven't read that.
Yeah, so I was quite a how can I put this, nerdy child. And I had a weird dream as a 13-year-old that I wanted to be a geneticist. And a lot of genetic studies have been done on twins because they are essentially kind of biological clones of each other. So yeah, a really weird niche interest for a teenager to have.
I've got to admit, though, I always had an obsession. I always wanted a twin sister. I've got a brother, quite a bit of an age gap between us, not a massive age gap, like 7.5 years, but that's enough for you to have completely separate lives. Whereas a twin would have been lovely, and I've always been fascinated by them. So when I got yours, I was like, yay, another one with twins.
There have been a lot of thrillers about twins, particularly this year and last year as well. So yeah, there's definitely been a bit of a theme, which is fascinating for me as a writer, because I've read some other books that could almost have come from the same prompt, but are so different in terms of execution. And it really does show you how the same topic in the hands of many different writers just produces this entirely different effect. So yeah, that's been really interesting for me, kind of as a novice writer as well, in terms of this is my first published novel. To see what other people did with essentially a similar idea, although not the same, obviously.
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to have a look at who these comments are from. So Daniel McBreakneck, hi Dan, I enjoyed Perfect Twin. Casey Moy says very clever story and not a very nice person. So like not a very nice person, exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. Hi Laura and hi Leslie. I can't see everybody's comments, but I am trying to see everybody without completely losing which tab I'm on. So just make it interesting. So why are you drawn to thrillers in general?
So I've always read thrillers. I remember, so where I grew up, I would say it was a big village or a small town, but it wasn't particularly huge. And we had a local library that we'd go to every week and pick our books for the week. So, and when I say we, that's me and my mum. My brother doesn't read. My dad has very occasionally, but not much fiction. So my mum and I would kind of troop up to the library every week, and it had a kids section that I'd read by about the age of 10, and there wasn't really at the time much YA. YA wasn't really a thing then. I mean, you had like some Judy Blooms and stuff like that, but you didn't have a huge range that you have now. And so I started asking my mum if I could kind of move into the adult section, and she was a bit like, oh, God, nothing with too much sex in it, and and she was a big thriller reader as well, and so she kind of steered me away from, this is romance, that's definitely a no-go if you're 11, and historical fiction, maybe not. And so she kind of steered me towards thrillers, thinking that they were kind of a safe zone for younger readers.
Oh, poor mum.
And I'm not really sure that Stephen King and Dean Koontz and those kind of writers are necessarily particularly child appropriate, but I just loved them, and I loved these stories that are, normally about people who are just put into these crazy situations. I love stories that explore that kind of dark side of, I suppose it's the, the monster that walks amongst us type story. So yeah, I've just always read those kind of books, and then as an adult, read a lot of post-apocalyptic and things like that as well. So I guess it's any story where you have normal, in inverted commas, people who are thrust into these extraordinary situations, and whether that's because of something happening in the external world, or whether they accidentally kill their sister and try and get away with it. But it's just those, I suppose it's those stories that elicit that, what would I do? So how would I have dealt with that situation? And yeah, what kind of, how do people deal with these just crazy things that happen to them? So I think that that's kind of followed a kind of central theme through all of the stuff that I enjoy reading, and then subsequently the things that I like writing. But I think I said before that it started as a short story, and it was much more of a love story at the beginning. It was much more centered around this woman and this potential relationship she was starting with this guy. And then I was trying to think of a way to, I was trying to think of the reason why she was pretending to be her sister. And this little voice in the back of my head kept going, it's because she killed her. It's because she, and it wouldn't shut up. And eventually I thought, oh no, that is actually quite fun. And it was just going to be a fun twist in a short story. And then I remembered a conversation with a friend about how difficult it would have been if you were living a double life in lockdown. And I suddenly thought, actually, this could be a novel. So
You've got hello from Casey on Twitter.
Hi, Casey.
So, somebody said, I feel so sheltered now. I think I remember reading aloud with my mum, but it was Little House on the Prairie. I've got to ask, the Stephen King's that you read back then. Now, I read The Shining, I believe I was late 20s, early 30s, and I couldn't read it past lunchtime. I had to put it away till the next day. Not kidding, really couldn't. Absolutely, like. So, have you read any of them that you read when you were younger again as an adult and thought, whoa?
I've read a couple. So I was much more drawn to his more psychological thrillers. So things like Misery is probably, weirdly, the book that made me want to become a writer, which is very weird considering that it's literally about someone who's kind of held hostage to write a novel. But anyway,
Doesn't matter as long as something speaks to you and something comes of it.
yeah,
Why does
that
it
I thought,
matter?
oh, that sounds fun. So I think I was always attracted more to his stories that were on that end of the spectrum rather than the hardcore horror side. And I think it's interesting if you read stuff like that when you are so young, you probably just skip over a lot of the stuff that's a lot more frightening as an adult. So it's on my list of things to do at some point, to kind of go back and reread some of those. And I'll probably be absolutely horrified. I reread Gerald's Game recently,
Haven't read it.
which I don't think I did read as a teenager, because it starts with her being handcuffed to a bed by her husband. So I don't think I would have read that as a.
Sounds like that wouldn't have made it past mum's radar.
I don't think it did. But I remember, reading that as an adult, and you go, this is absolutely horrifying, but it probably wouldn't have been if you were a bit younger, because I don't think you would have picked up on a lot of the nuance of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I am very glad now that there is a lot more YA, because a lot of my friends can say like, oh, do you have recommendations for kids? And I'm like, yes, I do, but it's not Stephen King.
No, it is not. Just because we're on the subject of mums, I took my mum for an afternoon tea last week before. It's the summer holidays for me. Days are still blending into each other. So it could have been 6 weeks ago. It could have been 6 hours ago. Who knows?
It was last week, because it was just before we recorded.
It was. It was the day we were recording. So I was talking about you and your book over lunch with my mum, and I started to explain the book, and she looked horrified, and I had to stop talking. She does cozy crime. She does sometimes watch the interview. So hello, mum, if you are. She won't be watching it live, but she might watch it back. But no, I had to stop telling her because she was so shocked. So I buy things like Kaz recommended Agatha Raisin books and MC Beaton. Is that the same thing? It's the same thing. MC Beaton wrote the Agatha Raisin books. And I've bought her some Francis Brodie and Peter Boone, all, brilliant. I wanted to get her some Faith Martin. I think she'd really enjoy those. Yeah, you have not got a reader in my mum. She will not read
It's
it.
not like my mum, who I recently bought my mum a copy of Sam Holland's The Echo Man, on the basis, and I gave it to her and I said, Mum, this is probably the darkest thing you'll read all year. And she was like, oh, brilliant, give that here. And loved it, obviously. But yeah, I do kind of almost, I suppose, seek out the even darker stuff to give to my mum.
That's the thing. I didn't think yours on the dark scale. I thought she'd be okay with it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have explained it to her. No. That is not. No, I shan't be telling her. In fact, I saw on Twitter today, book 2 has just gone to your editor, so I need to ask you about that. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been I don't want to say it's been difficult, because it hasn't. It's been an absolute joy to write. But I think every writer says this, writing your second is a very different experience, because you write your first, or you write before you get a publishing contract, you write in this vacuum, in this kind of hope that someone will read it eventually, but you don't know if it's going to find an audience. And I think that there is something quite freeing about that. But once you start writing under contract, it's not guaranteed that they'll publish it. They can still go, no, what is this? But you are writing much more consciously with an audience in mind. So it does feel a bit different, and also has deadlines that you're not used to having and things. But it's been fun, and it's been really lovely to work more collaboratively with someone to try and bring it out, because it's a little bit more complicated in terms of structure, but has some characters that I love. I have written the most horrendous mother-in-law character who was so much fun to write, and completely not like my mother-in-law, thankfully. Which I think is why it's easier to write sometimes those characters if you don't have that. Because I wasn't writing it thinking, oh God, my mother-in-law is going to read this and hate it. She'll love it. It'll be fine. So yeah, so that went to my editor today, and will come out, we think, in April next year. So
fantastic. I saw another tweet from an author, Graham Bartlett, today, and he was asking advice from authors who he's now on his 3rd book. The second one's due to come out, I should know this, I think it's June next year. Excuse me. But he was like, how do I just carry on? Is it normal to have kind of as much self-doubt over book 3 as it is with the first and the second?
So I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, but everyone, when you publish book 1, everyone says, oh, book 2 is the hardest book you'll ever write. But then now that I'm starting to talk about book 3, a lot of author friends have kind of gone, actually, book 3 is the hardest book you'll ever write. And I just wonder if that's
just carries on.
Just the way it is, and it just carries on. And then book 4 is the hardest book, and book 5, and so on. So, or I just think maybe, I think all writers, we love writing, but we also hate it at the same time. I think it's really difficult, and it is really difficult. And I mean, that's part of the reason that I love it, because it is such a challenge. And I'm a very weird person who likes to set themselves weird personal challenges and give themselves weird short deadlines of like, I will write by Christmas. But no one's telling me to do that, but I will just impose weird rules on myself because I'm a bit odd. But anyway,
I mean, because it took you a really long time to write book 1.
I'm probably the most hated person in publishing. So Her Perfect Twin, I had the idea for it at the end of August. And actually, I have an email from the 28th of August that I sent my mum, which set out I've had this idea. Here's like a 1-page summary. Do you think this sounds like it makes sense? And I still have that email. And she went back and went, yeah, write it. And then 14 weeks later, I sent it to agents. So from
I'm sorry, 14
weeks. Yeah, now I will massively caveat this with it was 2020, so autumn 2020, when we were in weird, that time we had like weird regional lockdowns and weird rules in some things. So you could do some things, but you couldn't do other things. And it was all really, really complicated. And so we just kind of stayed at home because I wasn't sure what we were and weren't allowed to do anyway. And I'd lost my job in the first lockdown. So I wasn't working. We don't have kids. So literally just had nothing else really. So I was very, very focused. And I think it was a little bit of a coping mechanism of there's all this uncertainty around what are things going to look like? Because we'd gone past by that point this will be 3 months and it's done, to now where is the end of this now? And so yeah, I think I just buried myself in work in writing and just didn't really talk to anyone else. And yeah, got it done. And then I was really lucky that it hit my agent's desk at exactly the right time, and it was exactly the story she wanted. And she was wanting to take on a new client, and yeah, just the whole thing was just incredibly lucky and timely, and all kind of came together in a way that I wasn't expecting, because everyone said to me, don't be silly, you'll never get published, it's all a pipe dream.
Why do people say things like that? No, 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 no.
Yeah, no.
Have a big swig. Laura Hamilton, a bit like when I was wandering around my mum's house loudly playing the audio version of Tina Baker's debut, and her mum was saying, what is that? You played that to your mum? Oh, Laura, Laura.
Oh, yes, loved that
Tina
book.
will be thrilled. Especially at the shocked expression, but wow. Oh, I would never do that to my mum. I couldn't even tell her about your book. So imagine, oh no, can't do it. So somebody has asked, did you already have other stories stashed away or in your head before Her Perfect Twin? Let me see if I can see who that is.
So
that's Casey.
That's Casey. So hi, Casey. So I had, like most writers I know, already written another book that sits in a drawer, and was not even a thriller. So it's a kind of feminist dystopia / political satire, not at all like Her Perfect Twin. So I'd written that over the kind of preceding couple of years, and that's the book that I suppose I consider to be like the one that I learned how to construct a book and all the things that you don't realize that you don't know before you start to sit down and write. So I remember sitting there going, how do I structure a piece of dialogue just in terms of how it sits on the page, and how long's a chapter, and how long is a book, and all of these questions that you don't even know that you don't know the answer to until you actually start writing. So that's the kind of book I suppose was my training novel. And I eventually kind of put it away when the pandemic hit, because writing dystopian political satire was not necessarily like the fun and uplifting way to get yourself through the pandemic. And yeah, started writing Her Perfect Twin later in that year. So I will at some point possibly dig that out, and I've got some ideas of how to turn it from what it was into a bit more of a thriller, which I think might be quite fun. But yeah, I think as soon as I started to give myself permission to write, I started to think of ideas, and now I've got it's a spreadsheet because I used to be an accountant, so everything in my life is in a spreadsheet of just random ideas, and some of them are kind of throwaway one-liners of things that you hear, or they're characters that you think of, or random situations, and then sometimes something will happen that connects the dots up, that makes you think actually there could be a much bigger story. Because obviously, yeah, you need an overarching story for a novel, but you need lots of other elements to pull together to really make it, I suppose, 100,000 words. It's quite a lot of writing.
It really is. We should mention lockdown because in the you can have a sip. I've got quite a long question to ask you. We did talk about how although it's set in lockdown, it's not really a lockdown novel, but there were elements of it being written during that time that became really useful.
Yeah.
But also, so in a good way and a bad way. So we know that Megan pretends to be Leah after she kills her. And that becomes difficult because lockdown happens. So you use it in a way that helps the story in some ways, in a positive way, but also you throw Megan in to live with Chris. And we haven't talked about Chris yet.
We haven't.
How much do we want to say about the
So
delightful man that Megan is
he
married
is.
to?
He is a delightful man. So we won't say too much, but I think it is. I think we can say um, Megan's husband is not a particularly warm and loving husband, and doesn't particularly treat her very well. And yeah, he's horrible. And part of the novel is narrated by him, which was really weirdly fun. Like it's because he's really, really horrible. And I write in a really close first person.
Mm.
So almost like you're inside their head
Which
listening to
I
their thoughts.
absolutely loved reading. Loved
Uh,
it. The whole first person thing has been a debate lately because of an author
yes, thank you,
who I'm
Philip.
not going to name saying his comments. No, no publicity for you, sir. But um, I just thought it was brilliant. I loved actually seeing everything from everybody else's point of view.
Yeah.
Literally living in their head as you're reading it. It's fascinating.
So the and it's a strange thing. So I'd always written previous to writing Her Perfect One, I'd always written in third person past tense. Just that felt natural. And as soon as I started writing Megan's story, I started writing, and it was only after a couple of thousand words that I looked back over what I'd written and realized that I'd written it in this first person, but it's really, really close. And it's almost like you're hearing their stream of consciousness. And sometimes it breaks the fourth wall a little bit. So she'll say, I know you're thinking this. And I'd not realized that that's what I was doing, but all of a sudden it felt like it kind of unlocked the story, and it became so much easier to write. And now that's become, I suppose, my default style, because it makes sense to me now to write like that. And for thrillers particularly that are there are certain elements from a plot perspective that are it's helpful when one person you're listening to one person's story and their version of events will not be the same as everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think for thrillers that works brilliantly. And it's not I really don't like it when writers deliberately hide information from the reader. But I do really like it when you suddenly realize that not every character has access to the whole story,
Yeah.
and that maybe things aren't playing out exactly how you expect them. So yeah, and it's just so much fun to write because you can, particularly evil characters in first person is great fun because you can really get into why they act the way they do. And yeah, it's quite fascinating.
There was a book that I saw, I'm not sure where it is. When I was out with Kaz the other day, I'd show it you if I knew which shelf it was on. There are a lot of shelves with books. It's called The Betrayals, and I believe it's Fiona O'Neill, but I could be wrong. But it's a book on there's four different people telling the same story, but who do you believe? And it was
Yeah.
so that kind of thing. Yeah, I find really fascinating, knowing who to believe and what version to believe, and yeah, really
Yeah.
interesting how two different people can see one event so completely differently, either because they
Yeah.
really genuinely do, or because they're horrible and lying.
Yes. Yes. And I think it is really fascinating. And it's from a characterization perspective, it's an absolute gift because you are you're literally seeing the situation from their perspective. So the things that they notice and the things that they don't notice say huge amounts about people. And I just spent the weekend with my parents, and we were talking about something that happened when I was younger, and my version of that story is completely different to my brother's version and to my parents' version, because we all saw it through a very different lens. And it wasn't anything serious at all. I've just made a big family secret. It really wasn't. But it is really, really fascinating, yeah, to see what people notice and what they believe about a situation. And also I think with Megan and Leah, again, you get a little bit of that view as to what their childhood had been like, and how you can have siblings grow up in the same household, but they see different things and they hear different things, and that is part of the reason that they become very different people when they're adults as well. So
Do you think you'd ever write a prequel showing more of how they both came to be the people that they are, whether a short story or a novella or a whole book?
maybe not about them, but I have got an idea for something that's very much again around that sibling rivalry and those kind of games that very close siblings, because obviously, you know, these are twins, so they're the same age, but they're any I think siblings that would be similar age as well. Some of the games that they would play, so that might be book 4.
Okay, so you've already started book 3, or you've about to start?
So book 3, I've got an outline, and the first couple of chapters are written. So yeah, which is
so how much planning do you do?
Not that much. So I tend to do an outline. I learned with the first book that I wrote, this feminist dystopia novel, I realized after I spent a year and a half writing it that it didn't actually have a plot.
Okay.
So I now try and make sure there is a plot before I start, because that's very helpful. So yeah, I tend to write kind of a 1 or 2 page outline of the kind of key beats within the story, and then I start writing really at that point. And I like to explore things on the page and recognizing that they can always be changed, or you know, you might go off on a tangent and then have to you know, kind of cut a bit of it and take yourself back to a point to get yourself back on track. But I really like that exploration in the writing process. So I tend to then write a first draft of 70-ish thousand words, and then at that point I then plot the whole thing out in lots and lots of detail. I have this stuff called Magic Whiteboard, which is amazing.
I've never heard of this.
It sticks to your walls, just to a plain wall with static, and then you can write on it with marker pens. It basically turns any wall
down
into
as we speak.
But it also, if you then get super sticky post-it notes, they stick to it properly and they don't fall off. So for planning and things is really, really helpful. And then I will kind of write out every single scene and every chapter and plot it all out on a massive whiteboard, essentially, to make sure that everything works, and then kind of weave through some of the reveals and twists and put in some of the signposts and stuff at that point. And then I go back and fill in some of the details. So I suppose I'm a bit of a planner, then lots of pantsing, and then going really, really detailed planning. But after I've got a feel for what it is that I'm writing, because I think for me, I have some of my best ideas of how to solve problems when I'm writing, when I'm in the writing, that I wouldn't have if I tried to plan everything right at the beginning. I think I'd lose some of that kind of, ooh, what if kind of moments that you get when you start exploring random things, like, what if I was to write some of this from Chris's perspective? And until I did that, he wasn't that horrible. And then I started writing, I was like, you are a very bad man. And that did change the trajectory of Her Perfect Twin.
And actually, from the point of view of a reader as well, from my point of view anyway, it did the same for me. It completely changed where I thought it was going, and did I know where it was going? I didn't really know. I completely didn't know where it was going. As we've kind of can't say certain things that I was thinking. It's you just, it was really nice that get it going from Megan's point of view, and then suddenly you're in Chris. That was like, oh, this is going to be good. Because you're trying to figure everything out. So no, I loved that. I love that. I didn't see that coming. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, I really like doing those changes, and I think that's one of the reasons that I don't plan to the nth degree, because sometimes you need to have kind of settled in and got to know these characters, and then when you start writing them, and the same thing happened with my second book as well, that I switched into a different person's point of view and realized that there was a different there was something else going on at the same time that no one else had realized. So I just really like having a bit of a play around with some of those things, and that for me, so I'm very much I love that first draft, and I love that freedom that comes with just there's nothing that I have to write, and I can just go and be completely free with it. Less keen on the editing side of things.
Not easy to edit your own stuff though, I'd imagine.
There are bits of it that I like, and I love my editor. Is she's quite good at giving sweeping statements that at the time when you first get your feedback you think, what am I going to do with that? But then it sparks a kind of change in direction that is really, really interesting to go off and explore. So I quite like the kind of big structural edits. I don't really like as much the, do you realize you've said the same word 3 times in this sentence? That kind of stuff. I'm less excited about that, and where commas go. And
commas are increasingly frustrating for authors, definitely.
Yeah, I think I'm quite lucky, I think, with stylistically how I write, because it is that close first person. You can get away with quite a lot of maybe non-traditional use of stuff, because you are mimicking how someone talks to themselves. So although obviously the whole book isn't dialogue, it kind of is in a way, because it is that individual stream of consciousness way. So I think I get a bit of a free pass from my copy editor around commas, but we shall see when this next one copy edits, because every time I start editing I realize that I have really horrendous weird little habits. So I used to be really bad that I double space after a full stop. No idea why. I've never used
it's how we grew up. There were double spaces in IT. There were double spaces.
My mum was a touch typist as well, so I think she must have told me at some point this is what you're meant to do. But then I realized this round of edits that I randomly just put spaces at the end of sentences before I start a new paragraph. So I spent 2 hours today going through the entire manuscript, just deleting random spaces.
Was that not quite therapeutic though? I quite like doing that.
At the beginning, when I realized I was doing it, because I hadn't realized that it was a thing before, it was quite like, oh, this is fine, and it's quite. And then I got to page 100 of 380 and went, oh god, I'm bored now. And then I thought, I really wish I hadn't started this, because I started it, so I have to finish.
Laura Hamilton said, and I like this comment, leading a double life during lockdown must have been very tricky. Megan must have been busy during her daily walk.
Yes, definitely.
Just a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh god, yeah, I do remember that. I mean, we've got a dog, so there was a lot of, if we if we got separate, so me and my husband, if we got separately, can she have two warts? Because I mean, she's collie, she's part collie, so she quite likes
Needs to
a lot
run
of
about.
exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the end, she just got fat and quite lazy.
I mean,
I'm
who
still trying to
didn't?
get her to lose the lockdown weight.
I'm not even attempting to touch mine. Absolutely not having. No, not bothered.
No.
Quite happy. So is book 2 another standalone?
Yes, yes. So book 2 is about a woman who is trying to get revenge for her best friend's murder. So yes, it's another. I think I've decided that basically my brand is women who try and get away with murder. So let's
And
just
I've
say
got to
that
tell you, I'm here for it.
it's not a niche that I ever thought would be my niche, but you know, that just appears to be the way my brain naturally goes of yes, let's write books about women trying to get away with murder. So so in this they are old school friends, and one of them is murdered and the other has to figure out who and then what she's going to do about it. So yes, which has
I'm excited one because anyone who's got a best friend knows just how protective you get about each other.
yeah.
So we can become quite nightmares when we're trying to protect our friends from something. And I look forward to reading this one.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. So you've written, obviously, book 1's out, book 2's been delivered. You've done an outline and 2 chapters for book 3. You've got an idea for book 4, and I'm guessing by Christmas they'll both be done.
I made a work plan. I'm such a disaster.
No, I love this.
So my professional background, I was a chartered accountant and then transitioned into project management for a while. So and then into commercial development, all quite boring, lots of car park building. But anyway, we won't talk about that. But what it has done is I am quite hyper focused, and I do like to have a plan and to say, a book is 80,000 words. Therefore, if I write 2,000 words a day, I can write a book in 40 days. And then here is my little spreadsheet tracker. And every day I can put my word count in and I can feel a sense of achievement. And I'm a complete lunatic. And yes. So,
I'm a fan of lists and ticking things off and necessary.
I think particularly with writing, because otherwise you have one delivery, which is deliver a book, and that's just bonkers as an end deliverable, because it's huge. I mean, there's a lot of words, and this isn't even a particularly long book. I don't know how people write like Game of Thrones or anything, but so I quite like to break it down into smaller tasks and put quite a lot of that project management methodology around it. So today I made a big spreadsheet with all the projects that I want to work on and when I want to finish stuff. Because yes, so I also write YA novels as well. The first one is out on submission at the moment, so fingers crossed that will find a home soon. So I suppose wear two hats, which also means lots of reading as well. So I read a lot of YA to write YA, and also obviously a lot of adult thrillers and lots of other stuff as well. So there's lots of reading and lots of writing going on. So I have this big spreadsheet that lays out every project and when we want to go on holiday and appearances at various conferences and things as well. So it's all in one big spreadsheet. And yes, and at some point I might have a day off, but probably not.
Okay, the obvious question here is my mum going to like the YA book?
Possibly not, because it's also a thriller.
Poor mum.
So yes, that is that also does have some murder and stuff in it. So maybe not.
That's all right. I just won't tell her. I won't tell her, and we'll just keep sending her kind of Peter Boone and MC Beaton, and she'll be fine. She'll be fine. Plenty of stuff to read. She's been reading Ellie Griffiths as well, so she's got things going on, mixing them up a little bit, and people keep sending me recommendations for her, so we'll keep her going. We'll keep her busy. Leslie wants to know: are you going to write the YA under the same name?
I have no idea, to be honest.
Is that
So,
more publisher decision?
yeah. So I think there are some adult thriller writers that also write YA under the same name. So Callie Taylor does, for example. There's slight variations. I think a lot of it depends of, would I want teenagers to read Her Perfect Twin? I don't know.
I think
so. Yeah,
I think it's fine probably for a lot of teenagers.
I think it's probably fine. And in fact, I did have a lovely message from someone on Instagram in the summer who had been explaining the plot of Her Perfect Twin to her 15-year-old who never reads, and her teen said, "Oh, can I read it?" And so she messaged me and she said, do you think it's all right for a 15-year-old? And I was like, I would have read it as a 15-year-old and not had any problems. So yes, and apparently she now has a new reading habit and keeps writing her mum for books.
Oh, that is so lovely. But when you think, I'd think, well, maybe this book that I've read wouldn't be suitable for my 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old as she grows up. And then you look at what they're learning at school and the things that they're learning about history in year 6 of primary school and the things that they learn in RE from a very young age. And you think, well, actually, why not? Why not? If this is what's happening in school, then at least they're getting some blooming good writing in with it.
Yeah, and I think as well.
Wide.
I think as well with YA, because obviously I read a lot of the kind of darker edge of YA, and a lot of those that are much more kind of murder based or horror stories as well. YA's got quite dark.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just now thinking of Mice and Men that my nephew recommended I read when he was in high school, and I hadn't read it. And that, if you're going to read, I don't know if you've read it, but anyone who is going to read that in high school, well, your book is not going to shock them. It's going to surprise them. It's going to take them down avenues, but they're not going to be shocked and upset by it.
No, and I remember I did A-level literature, and my favourite module was right at the beginning of the first year. So we were all still 16, and we did a Gothic literature module. And we did, Angela Carter, and and so like Bloody Chamber, which is kind of retellings, but really dark retellings of some of the fairy tales, and that is far more graphic and far more frightening than anything you'll read generally in psychological thrillers anyway. So it's fine.
I'm intrigued to know how your list, your planning goes, because you've got YA, you've got thrillers, you have a life as well. There's lots of things. I know you said you're not going to have a day off for a while, but there's a lot, there's a lot going on. So when you're breaking down into the 2,000 words per day, do you have subcategories of that as well?
So I tend to work on a single project quite. So I tend to focus a lot on one project, because then all the time where I'm walking the dog or cleaning the house or cooking or all of that other day stuff, I'm thinking about that one story in the back of my mind, so that then when I do sit down, it's quite quick because you've already worked out the scene that you're going to write for that day. So I do tend to work on one project at a time when I can, because otherwise stuff will start to bleed in, I think. So I do know some writers who can work on 4 kind of separate projects all at the same time. They can do 2 hours here and 2 hours here, and I'm like, no, I can't do that. I need to focus on one, and then I can write really quickly, and then I tend to have a couple of days to kind of decompress and then start on the next thing and work really focused on that. But there is so much downtime with writing, so whether that's just I'm putting a draft in a drawer to let it marinate for a while, or it's with my agent, or it's with my editor, or what have you. There is a lot of downtime to then look at picking up another project in those times. And and I don't really have days off, but that's partly because writing was always what I did in my downtime. So, and I think this is true particularly for a lot of writers who are now moving from doing it for a hobby to doing it more professionally, that bleeding between what's work and what isn't work, just like I have no idea what classifies as work anymore. And in some ways it's great because you're never working, but in other ways you're always working, so there is a bit of a balance between those things. But quite often I'll be like, what am I going to do this evening? And I'm like, all I want to do is go and write, because that's always what I did go and do. So I'll just go and write.
So your characters never actually leave you alone?
Not normally when I'm focused on it, but that tends to, I think that's a bit of just how my brain works as well, that I just get very hyper focused on things, which actually I think in kind of day-to-day life is probably quite bad, but writing is really, really useful. Like all of these things that like in like kind of in the rest of the world would be quite toxic traits, actually for writers is really helpful to be able to not think about anything else apart from this strange make-believe world that you've created.
What kind of things have been exciting for you? We asked a question about memorable moments as an author. So obviously, I mean, I'll just let you answer. I'm not going to give you suggestions.
I think the biggest thing for me has not been specifically a kind of individual moment, but the thing that surprised me most about the publishing journey is just all the people that I've met as a result of it. I think when you are sitting at home and you're writing, particularly kind of early drafts, and you are starting to send queries out to agents and things, it feels so massively isolating, and particularly doing it in lockdown as well, when there were months where I'd seen no one apart from my husband, and then to find within the writing community and the reviewing community and book Twitter particularly, just this huge group of individuals who we all share something like this common interest, but it's a common interest that is such a huge part of my life, reading and writing. And it's just been incredible just to meet all of these people and go from feeling quite isolated sitting writing my pajamas to going to Harrogate this year, and there were so many people I didn't even get to say hello to at Harrogate because there were just too many people that I wanted to talk to and not enough time over the course of the weekend. That's been incredible for me to, I suppose, just find this community and a community of people, and we just all love the same thing, which is books about murdering people.
It is quite a thing, isn't it? When you think you would never go into any other walk of life, kind of talking about the things that we all discuss. And we all think it's perfectly fine. And there was me describing your book and my mum was horrified. And I was thinking, this one's quite tame, compared to some of the stuff I've read. So, and generally,
I know, at least
I
it doesn't deliberately kill her.
It is an accident, Yeah.
Not
sure that we feel bad for Leah though when it happens.
No, and that was, I have to say, that was, I think, that was probably the biggest challenge with writing Her Perfect Twin was I didn't realize until about 25,000 words in that I was basically writing a book where you have to want the protagonist to get away with murder. And that was a bit of a kind of epiphany moment that I remember I was walking the dog and I suddenly thought, oh God, does that even work, to ask the reader to not just forgive her, but like will her on to get away with it? So I remember just buying this huge stack of books where the serial killer is the protagonist, and or where you do root for the killer. So My Sister the Serial Killer and the Dexter series and all of those books that put the evil person at the center, or the person who should be evil at center, but who you then do want to get away with it. And read a whole ton of those and went, oh yeah, no, this is fine. You can completely ask a reader to do absolutely okay. But yeah, I did have a bit of a moment when I was like, oh, I really do that. But yeah, it's fine.
Totally fine. Will said, such dedication to the craft, I need more focus. I'm far too easily distracted. Says the man whose 2 books are here. 2 fabulous books. So you've done 2.
So Will, you have more books than I do, so.
So yeah, give yourself a break, young William. It's almost 8 o'clock. Do you want to give everyone a recap of Her Perfect Twin and where they can buy it? And actually, I know I read the ebook, but I listened to the sample on Audible today just to see. Oh, isn't she fabulous? I haven't heard the 2 male readers, but the
yeah. So the audiobook is brilliant. I'm not sure if I meant to say brilliant. But
you're allowed to say it's brilliant.
Yeah, so Daphne, who narrates the twins, she's brilliant, and she's exactly what I thought Leah and Megan sounded like. And then George, who reads Chris, is so you won't have heard that bit on the sample, but he is just he's horrible and brilliant at it. It's just like, it's literally every inflection is how I wanted it to come across.
Okay. I'm gonna have to read it again on Audible, aren't I?
I know it sounds really weird that I sat and listened to it on Audible, but I have sat and listened to it on Audible because it's so fascinating to hear what you think it should sound like when it's read out loud, and to hear then these amazing voice actors kind of bring it to life is just fantastic. So yeah, I don't normally read audiobooks or listen to audiobooks. I tend to get weirdly distracted, but this, I have to recommend it. They're brilliant.
Yeah, I would agree. Like I say, I only heard Daphne, but yeah, brilliant.
They are really good, and I was so pleased when they said to me they were going to get different actors for each section to read it, because otherwise I think Daphne reading Chris would have been a bit tricky.
It could have worked. It could have been fine. You do have, narrators that do that, but if for you that doesn't work, then
I just think it just the people that they cast for it were just so perfectly cast that I couldn't imagine it having been done in another way, just because they did such a good job with it. But yeah. So yes, so the audiobook is obviously out now and available on all major platforms. The paperback is available from bookstores and the Big River Place. Obviously it's available in ebook as well, and then there are still some copies of the hardback with the blood cover, which interestingly someone did read this and then said that they thought it was a little bit too unexpectedly violent, and I was like, did you see the blood on the cover? That was maybe a giveaway to genre. So yes, so there are many ways to get copies of it at the moment, and then I don't know if I said ebook, but yeah, ebook as well.
Yeah, that's what I read on. That's why it's not behind me on my shelf, because I generally read on my phone, which is probably not very good for my eyes, but it works for me. So.
Oh wow, I can't. I have a Kindle, but I do still love a book.
I have a Kindle, and as I told Kaz yesterday, I lost it about 18 months ago, which was about 6 days after I found it after losing it the last time. So I don't know. If anybody knows what I've done with it, it probably won't work anymore anyway. It's that old, so stick to the phone.
Yeah,
Fine.
yeah. It's a godsend when my husband's trying to sleep and he doesn't want me to have the lights on because obviously it's backlit, which is helpful and much better than I have one of those little reading lights that go like that you clip on your book. They're not that good, but yeah,
my arms and hands aren't good enough for paperbacks, and hardbacks are probably a bit easier to read than paperbacks, but the Kindle just works. I can literally balance it wherever, and if I drop it on my face, it doesn't hurt as much as a hardback.
I did as well. I saw someone had one, and I very nearly bought one. I haven't yet, but I probably will for the winter. You can get a little page turner that clips on the corner of your Kindle with a USB clicker.
Right.
So that you don't, if you're like in bed and you have it like propped up, you can just move the pages without having to actually like put your hand out the blankets. So I think I might have to buy one.
I think I might have to buy one as well. That sounds ideal. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been so excited to talk about the book for
thank you
ages,
so much for having me.
And I hope you come back again for book 2.
Absolutely. So yes, that will be April, we think, for hardback, and then August for paperback. So
fantastic. Thank you to everybody who's commented as well, and we'll get writing book 3. You're in a race now with Sarah. Get on it. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely to have a chat and to be part of it.